On today's episode of the Harrison Vapnek Podcast, we're bringing on Tyler Henry, currently the voice for Northern Colorado Baseball, one of the best young play-by-play announcers there is out there. He's going to talk about some advice to play-by-play, how he does it, how he prepares, what it takes to call a big moment and stuff like that. Also going to talk about some of his days at Arizona State as an alumni there, some of the big games he announced there. So a really good interview coming up with Tyler Henry starting right now. Now bring on Tyler Henry, play-by-play announcer for the University of Northern Colorado Baseball, studio host for Lear Ford IMG College, and an Arizona State University grad. Tyler, welcome on.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to start with this because someone brought this up to me earlier. You announced for Northern Colorado University, which is in a city called Greeley, Colorado, known as the Cal capital of the United States. My friend Adam Busak from Colorado told me specifically to ask you this. It has the reputation for not the best scent. Can you confirm this?
I can confirm. It kind of just depends on the day, like a lot of other places. But I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, so the smell of the pasture doesn't really bother me that much. I'm kind of used to it. But yeah, you'll go out there some days, it'll be pretty bad. You go out there other days, it's not so bad. So it's nothing that's not manageable.
How bad does it get?
It can be pretty bad. I was down there yesterday and it was, I got out of the car and it was just like, wow, okay, this is a thing today. But yeah, overall it's not too bad, but.
So in your bio on your website, you mentioned that just 22 years old, you've already called 400 games as a broadcaster. How have you developed as a play-by-play announcer from your start until where you are now?
Oh, geez. So, I mean, I actually have the first broadcast that I ever did when I was 16 years old. It is horrible. And every now and then it's fun to just go back and listen through and just kind of see the things that you improve. But I think the biggest thing in terms of development is just listening to yourself and kind of, you're always going to be your harshest critic. You're always going to pick up on mistakes that other people won't. But I think the day that a lot of people stop getting better is the day that they quit listening back to their own content. I think that's where some people kind of get stuck.
What was your first broadcast as a 16-year-old?
So I did. I remember it was a high school football game. We had a class that allowed us to kind of come in and do some broadcasting work. We played our rival high school, Sacred Heart, for southeast of Saline. And yeah, we had two cameras on top of the press box. We were like on top of the roof, which is not by any means the most jank setup that I've ever worked with. But yeah, no, it was fun. I had this weird, awkward, like nervous laugh that I would do in the middle of the game, like all the time. That was the first piece of criticism I got from somebody else. Was like, you got to stop doing that. But yeah, no, it was a high school football game. We ended up getting a big win.
So now that you're a professional play-by-play announcer, not as your 16-year-old laughing self, take me through the prep of a day in the life of a typical game day when doing play-by-play.
Sure. Well, I mean, hopefully all your prep is done by game day, because if you're still working on, I mean, inevitably there will be things that you'll cram. But the days leading up to a game, I mean, you're always looking to get as much information as you can, especially with baseball and out here at UNC. Stories speak a lot louder than numbers. Like, you can sit there and throw stats out all day long, but that's ultimately not what people want to hear. They want to hear stories. So on game day, I try to get there, at least 2 hours early, maybe a little bit earlier. And as long as you have coach's approval, I mean, I like to be down in the dugout talking to the guys. And a lot of times, you don't really learn anything that's too pertinent, but you get to know the guys, you get to know who they are kind of more on a personal level. And that really lets you represent them better on game day. In terms of just getting there, again, you want to have all your prep done as early as possible. You get there, you set everything up, and then, depending on whether or not you have a producer, you might have some work to do with the equipment. But yeah, in terms of, when you're prepping before a broadcast, the week leading up to it, you're going to put in, if you're doing it right, you're putting in 5 to 10, 15 hours of prep, and you're only going to use a very small percentage of that you'd much rather have the info and not need it than need it and not have it.
So when you talk about the 15 hours of prep you do, what does it mostly consist of? Is it watching game film? Is it reading over stats, reading over articles from the local newspaper? What does that mostly consist of?
I think it's different for everybody. I like to kind of mix it up a little bit. I didn't play. So for example, like, I didn't play basketball. So for basketball, I can sit and I can watch film. But for me, I prefer to find kind of some of those local stories a little bit more, kind of get into the guys. But yeah, it just depends. You want to do a pretty good mix. I like to talk to coaches and players, and even if it's not before the game, I'll try to set up as many interviews as I can. And a lot of it is just information. So for baseball, I've got a Google Sheets doc or a Google Doc that has probably 20 pages worth of just notes on UNC. And we've done 8 games, and I've used a reasonable amount of it, but you've always got more that you have there to work with. Football and basketball, it's a little more straightforward because you have like more specific call boards that you're just filling out. But yeah, any information you can get your hands on is good information. And it's like I got the blessing to work under Gary Thorne, who's the Baltimore Orioles broadcaster. He taught a class throughout the summer, and he said when you can ask yourself, do I know everything that I can know about this matchup, and go to bed feeling content with that, then you can stop. But until then, there's always more prep to be done.
So before we go deep into your UNC stuff, you mentioned UNC. When you tell people to do play-by-play for UNC baseball, how often do they get confused with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill?
Yeah, when it's around here, it never happens. Anywhere else in the country, it happens all the time. I'll usually try to refer to it as UNCO, which technically they are UNC. Okay. They like to say they were there first, which they were. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, people think of UNC, they think of they think of North Carolina. Yeah, it happens, but yeah, it's just, people, you have to kind of clarify, because I've had a couple of people, I'm like, yeah, I work for UNC doing baseball. They're like, wow, like you got D1 Power 5 work already. I'm like, no, like D1, not Power 5.
So, you mentioned on your website, you've basically done everything. You've done Cape Cod baseball, college football, college basketball, baseball, softball, hockey, volleyball, at the high school level as well. Specific favorite sport you've called?
So that's tricky. I think my favorite sport to call, there are a few things that have the same atmosphere as a big Division I football game. But one thing that's kind of sneaky fun is volleyball. Volleyball is one that I had no experience with it. And I was, I get my hands on as many reps as I can. When I finally had a chance to do a volleyball game, it moves a lot quicker than I thought. There's a lot more that goes into it. So volleyball is one that I try to recommend people. I'm like, if you've never gotten a chance to do this, you want to get your hands on it at some point.
So I mentioned all those. When you get into a big moment, like in a football game where it's a 2-minute drill, or in basketball where there's like a tie game with a minute left, or runners on base in the 9th, how do you anticipate or get ready for one of those big moment calls? Because you know when it's coming. So kind of how do you compose yourself and get ready to call, basically the conclusion and the most valuable part of the game?
I mean, I think, again, it kind of depends on the sport, but you definitely have to calm yourself down a little bit. Some guys get a little sped up. They get a little too antsy. Because that's the thing. It's going to happen when it happens, and it's going to happen if it happens, and you can't control that, but you can control, being ready and being prepared in that moment. For me, especially in a baseball game, I'll try to just continue to frame what might happen. You keep giving the count, you keep giving the situation, and you just continue letting the intensity sit at that level to where when that breaking point does come, you're ready to make the call. Basketball and football move a little bit quicker, obviously, but again, you have to be prepared for every single one of those plays to be the play, because you don't want to be caught in a low energy moment and then somebody breaks it out for a big gainer, and you kind of get caught with your pants down. So yeah, that's just kind of it. It's just always being ready, but not overdoing it. You just kind of got to let the intensity sit at that. You kind of keep the tension where it needs to be, and the fans will do that on their own a little bit. And then when it does happen, you just got to be ready for the moment.
Well, that's when fans are in the stadium now that there's been some limitations, but we're heading toward a better moment. What would be the top piece of advice you would give to people who are starting as young now? They're not maybe a little younger than you. I know you're a super young guy, but very talented, already successful. So the people who are young but starting to develop a play-by-play, that's top advice that you would give to them.
Sure. The biggest thing that I tell people is get your hands on as many reps as you can. It doesn't matter if you're going to paid or not, because honestly, early on, you're not going to get paid. I worked unpaid as an intern for 4 years doing color commentary for high school sports. But that's where you get your start, and you end up working your way up from there. But the thing is, you can do all the practice reps you want. You can do all the training. You can attend seminars. You can listen to people that do it. The one thing that will make you better at what you do, especially in this industry, is repetition. And that's the best advice that I can give everybody. Even if you're not doing an actual broadcast, I tell people that all the time. I'm like, look, you may not have the opportunity to be on air, but you can go to a game and you can record yourself doing it and go back and listen to your tape, and you can get better that way. You want to get better that way. And I think that was one of the things for me when the pandemic hit was, I felt like I wasn't getting better there for a couple of months because I wasn't getting my hands on any reps. So I started going on to YouTube and just, pop up old game film and I'd do my thing and I'd go back and listen to it. But that's the one thing too. You want to be continuously getting better, and whether that's having people that you trust give you advice, or whether that's listening to your own film, just get your hands on as many reps as you can, as often as you can, whether they're on air reps or not. Anything is going to be beneficial to you.
When you started calling those, as an unpaid intern in the high school level, were you already in college when you were doing that?
No. So I got my start when I was 16 years old. Like I said, I got to do some streaming work through my high school. And unbeknownst to me, our athletic director was sending off my tapes to our local broadcaster who does stuff on radio, the guy that mentored me for 4 years, Devin Haney. And he basically shot me an offer to come and work and do some work under him. There was a guy there at the time that was technically ahead of me as the on-air intern. But it was just a simple open and shut case. He didn't show up on time. And that happened 2 or 3 times. And finally, Devin looked at me, he was like, "You're the guy now." And so, that also taught me a major lesson about just professionalism and being timely and being punctual. But yeah, I got my start on radio near the end of my 16th year. And then, yeah, just kind of doing a lot of color commentary work. And then I got a play-by-play gig in college and kind of worked it from there.
So we'll go into college a little bit. You currently do studio for Learfield.
Yeah, Learfield IMG College. And if that's not a name and you're trying to get into broadcasting.
Explain about that.
So Learfield IMG College, basically, there were 2 companies that were the main 2 competitors. And I want to say they own the broadcast rights to, I think it's something like 48 of the 62 D1 Power 5 programs in the country. They own the rights to do broadcasting for over 100. It's between 100 and 150 Division I properties. They are the big fish in this industry. And if you want to work at a high level, you have to work for them at some point. And it was cool because it was an opportunity for me to get back into, just working in sports, but also to work for a company that, even at the bottom level, as just a studio host, doing those pregame, postgame, halftime hits, and kind of doing the producing and engineering. It was really cool to be around some of the guys that, have been working at that high level and kind of just seeing the drive and the motivation that they have to try to get to where I want to be when I'm in my 30s. And again, I think the exposure obviously is helpful as well, but that's not the main reason that I went. But yeah, again, if you're going to try to get into broadcasting, especially in radio, Learfield IMG, you're going to have to come into contact with them at some point. And yeah, it's just, it was a great opportunity that they gave me. And it was certainly a blessing to be able to work in sports again during the pandemic.
So you do a lot of in-studio stuff for them. What is the difference between preparing for more of an in-studio role than kind of a play-by-play, the preparation that goes into it, and then the actual content?
Sure. I mean, I think so. The important thing to remember with like the studio work is that your main priority is to run a clean board, to run, you don't want to have any mistakes on air. You're responsible for making your broadcaster sound good. You cut highlights mid-game. So the preparation that you're doing is not so much researching the team or figuring out what you're going to say about the team. It's mostly just, making sure that you have your bases covered on what might go wrong, running scenarios in your head of, what you might need to adjust on the board or fix if something happens. But it's very different. I wouldn't say that I did, hours on hours worth of prep the way that I do for a play-by-play gig or for a play-by-play rep, the way that I did for the studio stuff. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast. You have to have an understanding of what it is that you're doing and what's required of you to make that work. And I think that's a balance that everybody just kind of has to find depending on where they're at.
So before you got to Learfield, that is, and then also Northern Colorado, you started with Arizona State University as a broadcast student there. What are the consensus top 5 broadcast journalism schools? I think everyone put it up there.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the best things that you learned there and some of the best experiences you had being a broadcaster at ASU.
Sure. So I think easily the best experience that I ever got. So my first year there, I was technically a sophomore, but it was my freshman year at ASU.
Yeah.
And I remember I saw on the schedule. So I grew up in Salina, Kansas, which is about an hour and a half outside of Lawrence. Big Jayhawk fan my whole life. And I saw that Arizona State was going to be going there. And I remember I asked our producer, I asked our sports director, I said, "Hey, do we have anybody going to cover that game?" And he said, "As of right now, I don't think so." And I asked if I could do it. He said, "Normally we don't send first year students out, but like send me your tapes. I'll take a listen." And basically he got me approved and he got me credentialed to call a game at Allen Fieldhouse at 19 years old, which is the craziest thing that I've done to this point. It was absolutely insane. A couple other ones that come to mind. I had a habit of, if they'd put me on a game, it would always end up being a game that ASU would pull an upset in. I think under my watch, we upset Kansas when they were number 2 at Allen. We upset Oregon and knocked them out of the college football playoff. I got to do the broadcast for that game. We beat an undefeated Washington team in basketball. We beat number 1 UCLA in baseball, and just all of those experiences adding up. I mean, just being there with big crowds and with a lot of energy and with just high intensity moments, it was a really good time. And I don't think anything, a lot of things just don't quite compare to that. But I think if anything, I use that as extra motivation because that's where I want to get back to. I kind of feel like I got a taste of what it's like to work at the highest level with some of the best people. And now, again, just kind of starting fresh out of college and trying to work my way back up to that point.
That game in Kansas in what was 2016? It was.
Yeah, I think so. Or
Okay.
No, it would have been 2017.
2017.
But yeah,
that season.
Yep.
Were you deep down rooting for Kansas because you are a Jayhawks fan growing up around there, or was it pulling for ASU, or you didn't really mind?
I tried to be as neutral as I could. And it was, I go back and I listen to it. I have the highlights. But yeah, I think it was hard. I was conflicted because, it's my school. It's the school that gave me a shot against the school that I grew up rooting for. Ultimately, I think what it turned into is just I had a lot of fun. Anytime either team would score, I was amped up. And of course, that atmosphere is it's so electric at Allen Fieldhouse. There's really nothing like it in all of college basketball. Sorry, North Carolina, Duke, and Kentucky, but there's nothing like Allen. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I think the Allen is the one. The tradition, it's not in my head right now, but whatever they do before the game, the song,
the fog.
The fog.
The fog. Yep.
That is. What was it like actually seeing that in person, but not as a fan though? It's like kind of more of a neutral perspective.
It was weird because they had us up in the corner and we were probably 8 rows back, right behind the student section. So I mean, we're right next to the loudest part of the stadium. And yeah, I'm sitting there in like an oversized suit that I had bought for that. If you go back through my Instagram, it didn't fit. It wasn't a good look, but it was my first suit. I got it off the rack. I didn't get it fixed at all. But yeah, it was so crazy. I think the craziest thing too was that was my first play-by-play call for men's basketball. I had done one high school girls basketball game before that. Everything else that I had done had been color commentary. And now I'm getting dumped into a position where ASU is the last undefeated program left in the country. They're coming in at number 15 and they're playing against the second best program in the country in Kansas in, again, just this crazy atmosphere. And I remember I had the first half for play-by-play before I switched off with my partner, Braden Bell. And it was, I don't think my heart has ever been just pounding out of my chest the way it was before that game. It was so hard to kind of compose myself. But man, once I settled in and kind of got into a rhythm, it was a lot of fun.
So you have a great broadcasting career at Arizona State, and then you go on to Northern Arizona University, and like many Americans, you lose your job as a result of the pandemic. Did you get discouraged about this job search and getting back into the industry that you work so hard for and that you love? So kind of take me through that experience.
Yeah, so I got my first job at NAU doing women's hoops, and then I ended up transitioning that into a job at UNC. And then, yeah, like everybody else that works in sports, the pandemic hit. There's nothing you can do about it. You kind of just have to roll with the punches. It was hard. Like, I'm not going to lie and say that, it was comfortable for me, especially not moving back in with my parents and just kind of, I couldn't even get work at grocery stores. But there just came a point where I was like, you just got to muscle through it. And like I said, that for me, that was just kind of getting some experience with, being able to do some YouTube dry calls. And then eventually when high school football season started up again, I was able to do that before Learfield took me on. But that's the one thing that I've also noticed, that like, look, there are going to be a lot of people in this industry that are going to have more money than you, more talent than you, more connections than you, but there's never an excuse for anybody else to work harder than you or to try to do more than you. And that's really where I got my first job. I sent 354 emails out, one to every single D1 college, just asking about work. Because technically, they tell us, and you hear a lot from some of the guys that have been in the industry for a while, they say you're not really supposed to have a D1 job until you're, 25, 26, 27. So, I've always kind of bet on myself and bought my own stock. And I think that's something that's important for everybody to do. But I knew that eventually, if I kept my head down and just kind of kept grinding, that eventually something would come up, and it ended up panning out for me. So.
Yeah, I think you're making a good investment betting yourself. Now you're in Northern Colorado. Tell me how that season's going right now. I know the team is 4-7, but is there optimism? I know you're definitely doing a great job calling the game. What's been the feel so far this season?
Yeah, it's a great group of guys. I think that's the most important thing, because with baseball especially, you got to have a short memory. You got to be able to bounce back after a loss. Saturday is a perfect example. They lost game 1 11-1. They came back, they won game 2 14-4, and you never saw the guys put their heads down or get frustrated with themselves. They just bounced back and they came back and they did it. And I think when you have a group like that, when you have a group that's as loose as this Northern Colorado team is, and especially being around these guys in the dugout, it's a fun bunch to be around. So again, regardless of some of the results as we get a little bit further into the season, it's not something that I'd be worried about. And I think this team also has a lot of talent, especially in the pitching. And kind of the top 5 and 6 guys in this lineup. This has got a team that's got a lot of potential. So I'll be interested to see once we get into conference play, kind of how things shake out.
Any future major leaguers in the rotation?
It's hard to say because a lot of these guys kind of had rough 2020 seasons when things got pandemic shortened, but that was it was just a slow start. It was kind of an odd start. But I think honestly, I mean, one name that I would recommend everyone keep an eye on, Dylan Bowers has got some disgusting stuff. He's the Friday starter. He's got one of the better curveballs that I've seen. He's got some good velocity on his fastball. And then Jake Gitter, he's been leading off for him right now. The kid, he just rakes. I mean, simple as that. He's got that kind of eye of the tiger that some guys have. And I'm not sure where exactly he would go because I haven't really seen the entire landscape with the draft and whatnot. But those are the 2 names that I think probably the most likely guys to possibly come out and maybe make their way into the league.
Doing play-by-play for baseball, is it like, because you're doing 3 games in 4 days, 4 games in 4 days, is there a fatigue kind of thing as a play-by-play guy? Because that's a lot of talking for 3 hours. How do you kind of mentally and physically prepare yourself for that? Because I've never.
So I mean, physically, it's a lot of tea with honey. It's a lot of cough drops. It's a lot of. I mean, my games are sponsored by Ricola. They might as well be. I'm popping those things throughout. I think, mentally, it can be challenging, especially in a loss. Like this Sunday, the team was down. I think it was like 8-0 in the 3rd inning. And you just know, you're the only guy on the broadcast. You don't have a color commentary to bounce ideas off of. You have to try to keep your energy up for those next 6 innings, regardless of whether or not the team comes back and finds a way to win or not. So, I think a part of it is just you just kind of have to muscle through it when things are bad, but you also have to know that that's just the nature of the beast, and that's what we sign up for. And we, it's different because I've done a lot of games that are, all the high school experience. Most of that was neutral. Like I came in as a third party. We had no stake in anything for either way. It's a little bit different when you're calling for a team because when that team is losing, you obviously, you're not going to act overly enthusiastic that the team is down 8-0. You're not going to, treat it like you would a neutral broadcast. But yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge, but I think the people that really are dedicated to being in this industry, you find a way to get through it and you find a way to make it to where it's not really noticeable on air that you're not as engaged. It's about staying engaged. You are engaged. So
yeah, definitely a lot of hot tea with lemon for that. Just keep your voice nice and perfect for your 3 games in 4 days or whatever the number is. You mentioned you grew up in Kansas. Does that make you a Chiefs fan, a Royals fan, teams from that area?
So I'm a Royals and Sporting KC fan. I am actually a New Orleans Saints fan, which is, I always tell people, so I wasn't into football when I was a kid, ironically enough. Yeah. The Chiefs were horrible and I couldn't get into it. My dad didn't really watch. But I remember we boxed up like boxes of supplies for the hurricane victims, for Hurricane Katrina when I was in grade school. And for a homework assignment, we had to watch the reopening of the Superdome. And I fell in love with the team and I've been a Saints fan ever since. And then of course, ironically enough, the NFL is the one sport that I feel confident talking about to any degree nowadays. So yeah, it's kind of cool how that happened, but yeah, for the most part, Royals, Saints, Kansas Jayhawks, Sporting KC, a couple others mixed in here and there.
What is the worst Saints heartbreaking loss? I have to ask you.
It's gotta be the no PI. I mean, it has to be.
That's the usual answer.
Look, Marcus Williams made a mistake. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the Minneapolis Miracle. They didn't get screwed on the Minneapolis Miracle. They certainly didn't get screwed the year after by the Vikings. But man, that Nickel Roby-Coleman no call, that's got to be the most angry I think I've ever been watching one of my teams lose.
Yeah, that must have been beyond tough, despite my team during the Patriots actually winning the Super Bowl that year. So
poor you.
It works out like that.
Life is so hard.
Yeah, Boston sports hasn't won a championship in like a little over 2 years. This is the longest stretch it's been in quite a while.
A tiny violin. I'm breaking it out just for you, buddy.
It's been sad. I'm gonna send you on this. I did the same game with Drew Carter, who went to Syracuse. Give me about a 30-second to a minute rant of why Arizona State is the best broadcast journalism school.
Okay. So Arizona, has unparalleled opportunity, and that's what I think puts it over Newhouse. I think the fact that you can come in as a freshman and call a game at Allen Fieldhouse, you can come in as a freshman. True. I mean, yeah, but also, I don't know. I just think the opportunities between the student radio station, between the Walter Cronkite Sports Network, the opportunity for you to get your hands on reps early on is the most important thing. And I think the fact that at such a young age, you can get those big Division I calls. It's just not something that a lot of other colleges really offer. So that's why, that's a big part of the reason why I would say ASU is probably the best broadcast school, at least for play-by-play guys. But that, again, just my opinion.
No, we've had Syracuse, had a Mizzou alum. You're our first Arizona State, trying to get everyone to pitch in why their school is the second best broadcast journalism school behind Mizzou. But it works out like that. Thank you, Tyler, for coming on, talking all things Northern Colorado baseball, your play-by-play experience and all. Tell us where the people can hear your voice in the future.
Sure. So all of our games are on the WAC Digital Network. We'll also have links up on the official Twitter. I was just asked to be the UNC Bears women's soccer broadcaster. So we'll have those games starting up on Friday. You can also go check out, I'm on Twitter at TBH Sports. I've got a podcast that comes out about once a week, the TBH Sports Pod. You can hear any of my sports opinions that you may or may not want to hear on there. And yeah, for now, that's really about it. But yeah, the WAC Digital Network is where all of our baseball broadcasts are on. We'll be back in, I believe, about 2 weeks, the last weekend of March. We got a series against Utah Valley for UNC. So we'll be back on the air then.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Tyler.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Huge thank you to Tyler Henry for coming on the podcast, talking about all things play-by-play, how to get in the industry, how to do well in the industry, and everything in between. Thanks to Tyler for coming on, talking with me. Next up on the Harrison Vapnek Podcast, going to have on Malik Wright from the Right Way Sports Network, also possibly Jake Serkis to talk about TWSN, one of the fastest rising sports media websites, I should say. Platforms really good there. Talk to Malik about the finding of the website, how he built it, and also some stuff about the Cincinnati Bengals and other experts on them. So stay tuned for that. And as always, have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Harrison Vapnek Podcast. See ya.